What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. The modern warfare is extremely unpredictable, and one single event, whether intentional or accidental, can change the course of war completely. We already witnessed similar things during the particular conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The accidental crossing of Polish and Romanian borders by either drones or missiles, the falling debris on residential areas, targeting of hospitals, apartment buildings and theaters, everything. But so far, there is at least one particular object which is considered absolutely sacred and untouchable. These are the schools. It does not matter if a school got targeted accidentally or even worse, intentionally. This will lead to a severe escalation, especially if the opposite force did it. And this is what happened recently in Russia, though not too many people talk about it, and especially not the Russian propaganda. Because honestly, this is a total humiliation for Putin. That's why they do everything possible to silence this story. Probably that's why you haven't heard about it either. I personally discovered only like yesterday. So, today, let's talk about this incident with one of Russian schools and why the Russian propaganda, which tends to use any attack against the civilian objects in Russia to blame Ukrainians and escalate even further. And now, well, they are completely silent. Less than 2 weeks ago, a quiet morning in the village of Bykovka in the Belgorod region was shattered by an event that could have rewritten Russian history. At 6 AM local time, a Russian Aerospace Forces aircraft accidentally dropped a 250 kilograms present on the local school. It destroyed the roof and fell inside one of the classrooms. By sheer luck, the school was empty at this time, because classes were scheduled to begin at 8:30 AM, so luckily no one was injured. Another extremely lucky coincidence that this package did not trigger, so it was just almost like a heavy piece of metal falling and, well, that's about it. Even if the hour was early, but there was an explosion, that it would have become one of the most catastrophic events of this war. Sides will immediately blame each other. Putin will escalate significantly, because, yeah, schools, no matter what, should, and they do remain untouchable objects. This particular school accommodates students from 1st to the 9th grades, including 2 first-grade classes full of young children. So you can only imagine the consequences if this incident happened several hours later and the package triggered. The psychological trauma alone would have been immeasurable, not to mention the potential loss of innocent lives. This event serves as a stark reminder of how close we came to witnessing one of the most tragic events in the modern Russian history. And yet, the Russian propaganda had zero to none mentions of this event ever happening. Guess why? Well, this is one of the most humiliating things that happened under Putin's watch. This will immediately make other nations and even the patriots to question whether similar events that happened in the past or will happen in the future are the result of Ukrainian attacks and not Russian own forces' mistakes. When something happened on the Russian territory and all the evidence was destroyed as a result of an explosion, it is extremely easy for the Russian propaganda to blame Ukrainians. Videos, photos and stories exist. The debris, which is carefully collected by the FSB for investigation purposes, so there is no way to prove who was behind the attack, well, this thing vanished completely. But here, the ammunition remained intact. The propaganda was not able to publish photos of it and say that this was Ukrainians. Simple 5-minute Google search will reveal that this was indeed Russian munition. They might have still tried to blur it or something and blame Ukrainians nevertheless. But since the object in question was the school, they decided to sweep the entire story under the rug. The fear of being discovered and the humiliation that will follow will be much severe than the momentary spike of hatred towards Ukrainians. The incident in Bykovka is not an isolated case, but a part of a troubling pattern resulting from inevitable chaos of war. Military operations, by their very nature, often prioritize strategic objectives over civilian safety. The logic of war dictates that the mission comes first, sometimes at the expense of unintended casualties. In the heat of conflict, pilots and artillery operators focus on their targets, relying on technology and calculations that are not without flaws. For example, Russian pilots have been known to release ordnance based on coordinates provided by the onboard computers without fully assessing what lies beneath their flight paths. Just a simple glance what's below them could have potentially prevented so many unfortunate incidents. But once again, for them, the mission always comes first, and they have to rely on superiority of their equipment, that nothing will malfunction, that the wings will deploy and the munition will glide where it needs to go, and not just fall down like a stone. And since most pilots, at least Russians, they never do it and they just press the button, this can lead to projectiles veering off courses, sometimes landing in residential areas or even friendly territory. On April 20th, another alarming event occurred when 2 Russian aircrafts dropped missiles over Belgorod. One of them detonated upon impact, fortunately missing residential buildings and burying itself in the ground, and 3 people were injured. And the second one, which likely did not explode, struck a residential building and destroyed 3 balconies. Such incidents introduced the term of abnormal descent of ammunition, which was used by the Russian propagandistic dictionary. When they couldn't take advantage of these situations and blame Ukrainians simply because it was way too obvious who was behind the attack, the only thing left for them was to implement dismissive and complex language. The purpose of this is to acknowledge that yes, it did happen, but at the same time distance themselves from any responsibility, so they don't need to explain themselves even further and God forbid apologize to the regular people or pay them money for this destruction. That's like the worst thing that the Russian authorities can do. The narrative is the following. You live in the neighboring region with Ukraine, so you assume all the responsibility and consequences of potential military actions, mostly from Ukrainians, but okay, sometimes we can destroy your house as well, accidentally of course, but well, you cannot complain, you decided to live here. The potential political fallout from such incidents cannot be ignored. Had the projectile in Bykovka detonated during school hours, the Russian authorities would have faced an unprecedented crisis. The government would be confronted with a grave dilemma: either accept responsibility for the tragedy or deflect blame onto external forces. But just like past examples can already confirm, it gets increasingly difficult for the Russian propaganda to blame Ukrainians for attacks against Russian territories deep behind the front lines. There have been instances where officials have made baseless claims to shift focus away from domestic failings. For example, Maria Zakharova, the press secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, once assumed that Ukraine had established concentration camps for residents of the Kursk region, a claim that was quickly forgotten due to its lack of evidence. Even Z-patriots called her mad for even suggesting it. In the case of the school tragedy, such deflections could likely be insufficient. The public outcry and demand for accountability would be incredible. One thing when regular people suffer the consequences of war, completely another thing when kids go through the same unfortunate experiences. There will be no unaffected people left, and it does not matter whether this is yours or somebody else's child. People will feel it in their hearts that something truly horrible happened, and the answers will be demanded. Blaming external entities might even make people distrust and despise their own government even more. When something absolutely devastating happens, the last thing people want to hear and see are the authorities pointing fingers and blaming different people all at once. The people would want somebody to take responsibility. They would want to hear a genuine apology and a promise of sincere attempt to find and punish those really responsible, not just the most obvious enemy. And most likely even this will not be enough. The resignations and the reshuffle of the political apparatus will be demanded as well. So now guys, you see more and more reasons why the regime of Putin decided to quietly ignore the school incident altogether. Right now they're most likely praying and thanking whatever gods and divine powers they believe in, that the munition just fell, not leading to even bigger destruction. This very well might have become the trigger for the people of Russia to unleash their hidden rage and dissatisfaction against Putin and his cronies. While nuclear weapons often dominate discussions about global security threats, they remain, paradoxically, among the most controlled armaments. The deployment of nuclear weapons involves following the strictest protocols and is subject to high-level decision-making processes, reducing the likelihood of accidental use. The countries even have to notify each other if they are sending nukes towards their way. The reason for this is the following. If a country's raiders detects an ICBM coming their way, and if there was no previous warning from the potential launching country, the defending country might assume that this was a deliberate hostile attack, and send their own nukes in response. But what if it was just the equipment malfunction? What if raiders caught something that was not there? In this case, the responsive nukes might end up not responsive at all. Instead, they'll be seen as hostile. Something similar already actually happened in the past. Stanislav Petrov, the Soviet officer, saw that raiders detected missile being launched from America. He did not believe the machine, even though the commanders ordered him already to send ICBMs towards the US. It ended up being simple glares that tricked the raiders. There is even a movie about this incident called The Man Who Saved the World. And it's a very good one. You can go ahead and watch it, by the way. So long story short, that's exactly why countries have to notify about their launches, in order to avoid such confusions. Because if raiders detect something and there was no previous warning, this will be considered as an act of war with all of its consequences. In contrast, conventional weapons are used extensively and are subject to the unpredictability of warfare. The widespread use of conventional weapons, such as artillery, drones, short-range missiles, and similar, introduces a significant risk of unintended casualties. Equipment failures, human error, and the sheer volume of ordnance increases the probability of accidents like the one in Bykovka. Military personnel operate under the pressure of combat, often with the limited situation awareness regarding civilian areas, which can lead to tragic mistakes. The use of civilian infrastructure and vehicles by military forces further blurs the lines between soldiers and civilians. This practice not only endangers regular people, but also violates the military rules of war. The presence of military assets in or near civilian areas can result in destruction of such areas, putting innocent lives at risk. As long as the conflict continues, so does the risk of unintended tragedies. No amount of political will or military oversight can eliminate the inherent unpredictability of war. The only sure way to prevent further loss of life and destruction is to pursue a total end of hostilities. Well, there I have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.